This week on the Legion Clubhouse, is someone getting demoted?
They were the heroes from the future. Teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities. And though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now, you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
All right, Ed, I found this very interesting, Matthew, because we are on issue 50, and this is not, I mean, it is a big issue as far as a story goes, but nowhere on the cover treatment or anything are they like, the fabulous 50th issue of the Legion. There's like, you would expect at issue 50, even in the 1980s, that they would be doing a lot of pomp and publicity and hyperbole and all of that stuff in here.
Well, I think part of the reason that they didn't is because just a few issues ago, in issue 45, we had the big 30th anniversary issue.
Yeah.
And I think that in 1988, there was still, what's the word I'm looking for? Shame? It was something where if you had just done that, you wouldn't want to come back and do the same thing immediately again. Yeah, I'm sort of fine with that. And I really feel like what you're referring to does kind of come around a little bit, not much later, but a little bit later than this. Like by 91, every 25 issues would be a big, thing.
Yeah.
And issue 25 has a silver cover, and issue 50 has a gold cover, and issue 75 has a cover made of pure veridium.
Yeah. Keith Giffen is working on the story and doing the art. And I think Keith Giffen has officially entered his Mobius phase.
In this case, I think you're right, especially with the two or three page opening spread of just that, what feels like a slow cinematic pan through the destroyed world into the Time Trapper's citadel. And then, Mr. Purple Pants just kind of hanging out there and doing his thing. Yeah.
Well, but even Metropolis and even Brainiac's lab is all just like girders and layers and things upon things and little noodly bits here and there that don't really need to be there. It feels so very much overdone. And that's why I say, it looks so much like what Mobius would do. Whether you're reading, we've read so much over on the Major Spoilers podcast. You guys can jump over there if you want to hear our thoughts on the artist there. The other thing that is very interesting here is we're also starting to see the start, but more so in the next issue, not the next issue that we're talking about this week, because boy, we got something to talk about there. But the next episode, where we're starting to have radical character design changes. And we get a little inkling of that with Bouncing Boy, who, why does he have a mustache?
I don't know. This may
Is he supposed to be Chef Boyardee? He looks like Chef Boyardee. This might be
the first appearance of Bouncing Boy's mustache. I remember
it is the worst.
Clearly from the framing sequences in Who's Who in the Legion. And I'm just like, why does Chuck have a mustache?
Yeah.
But also, if you look closely at that opening sequence with Ultra Boy, it kind of looks like he's wearing street clothes over his costume.
Yeah, he's definitely wearing like a vest of some kind, which was all the rage in the 80s.
It's either next issue or the issue after. I think what we're going to see is that what he's actually wearing here is a miscolored or alternately colored version of what's going to become his new costume. With like a leather jacket and leather pants. Yeah.
Is he
like a whole tough guy outfit?
Are superheroes starting to show shame for their costume designs? Is that it? Is that why they're covering up? Or is there just no explanation? Back in the 70s, everybody's wearing hardly anything. And it's like, yeah, free love, man. We're rebelling against the system and we're going to do whatever we want to do. And now they're a little bit more conservative and they're just like, yeah, we probably should cover up. And I kind of regret wearing this big Thunderbird on my chest because that's kind of insensitive to native peoples.
I think, well, first of all, it's not a Thunderbird. It's Rimborian leather beast. But yeah, I think what it is we're getting into the heavy leather jackets and belts and straps phase. And while this is early, this is about the time that John Byrne over at Marvel gives Doc Samson one of those first leather jacket, ponytail, belts costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will start seeing more and more of that.
Well,
in universe, there are new costumes coming, and there is an
like
in-universe
issue 51. Issue 51, everybody gets a radical change. But the thing that I like,
Polar Boy orders everybody new suits. But
the thing that I like is that superhero costumes tend to be skin tight because for whatever reason, one can argue that artists only draw the nude models and they don't know how to draw clothing on top of people or whatever. That's one argument that has been made. And so that's why everything is just spray painted on. But here I like the fact that clothing has weight to it. I think that is part of good design and good art is when the world feels like it has something to it. Now, that being said, I like Mon-El's costume because it has weight to it and it hangs. But also, moon boots did go out about 20 years previous to this. So that would be the only thing that I would say probably doesn't work here are the moon boots. And if people don't know what moon boots are, I think people know what moon boots are because moon boots had a resurgence like 8 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, let him have his boots. There's a point in the 80s where Howard Chaykin takes over and everybody is kind of wearing like high mid-ankle jack boots for a while.
Yeah.
And if you go back to like 66, right around the time that Wallywood created Daredevil's costume, you get people in like monkey boots, like a short boot. But honestly, the reason why superhero costumes are so tight historically, this is true, is because the printing on comics in the 1940s was not particularly good. And so if you put too much detail, if you tried to add too much texture or too much weight or tried to make something feel like it was, there, it would all just kind of blend into a big goopy mess. So if you drew a human figure and the costume was lines on the figure and the colors were bright enough, your brain would fill in the expectation that, say, Superman's costume has seams, it has weight, it has, bits at the knees and it has stuff at the shoulders. But you couldn't see that because in 1939, 1940, it just wouldn't print. It wouldn't transfer onto the paper. So
I think we're also seeing, at least in this issue, and I don't know if it continues from here, but we're also seeing weight added to characters' faces. We're starting to see characters who traditionally maybe whisper thin, who now have very full faces. In the case of the White Witch and Dream Girl, both have very full faces in this issue. And I don't know the reason for that, except that, I don't know, it just feels like, oh, well, if Dream Girl is supposed to be Mae West, she's not, then she needs to be heavier. And so they're intentionally, and Mike DeCarlo is doing the inks on here, but they're intentionally drawing both Dream Girl and the White Witch thicker in the face and other body parts.
Part of that is Giffen's style evolving. Because if you look at the male figures, they still have very tall ovoid heads.
Yeah. I was specifically going to point out Ron Vidar, who has a very skinny head. Brainiac 5's head kind of evolves throughout the issue.
Yeah, and if you look at Polar Boy, about halfway through the issue, Polar Boy's head is like literally the shape of a pill. But it's partly Giffen, because as Giffen sort of transitioned into the Legion 89 era, is what I think of it, this art style, he does try and make his female characters not thicker necessarily, but more rounded. And because of the elongated figures that he's been playing with for so long, you remember when everybody was rail thin and had a triangle face like 5 years ago? Yeah, he's getting to a point where he's evolving and trying to offset that. And we'll see as we go into the Volume 4 Legion a lot more of that. But yeah, I think it's just Giffen's kind of playing. And you called the Möbius influence, and I feel like that's actually a really good call, and I had never thought about that before. I complained about the Munoz influence being too heavy, but this really feels like it's kind of a different feel, a different European kind of, I don't want to say ripoff. Let's just say homage. His taking his influences from a different place.
I mean, that's what art is. I mean, people get very upset when you say, "Oh, they're just ripping off so and so." It's not. It is a copying of that style, and that is something that happens all of the time in art. Maybe more so in comics. You can't go and look at a webcomic without seeing that any new webcomic today being influenced either by Garfield or influenced by Penny Arcade
Peanuts.
or being influenced by Control-Alt-Delete. That style has permeated into what people consider a web comic style. And so when you see somebody saying, oh, well, I'm being heavily influenced right now by a movie that I'm watching, and all of the stuff that they shoot in their videos, you can tell are being heavily influenced by whatever they're watching, then that is part of the art process. That is part of art growing and evolving. And so part of me, even though I'm not saying that AI art is great, I think a good argument can be made that, well, art is, AI art is being influenced by other people's art. Now, part of the reason why that argument kind of falls flat is that there's no emotion or no reasoning behind it. But I think an AI person would probably make that argument of, well, if Keith Giffen is channeling Mobius here, then certainly my AI system that's been trained on all of these various artists, and it comes up with something that kind of looks like Jim Lee. That's just the natural progression. But that's an argument for another time. So Brainiac and his conspirators have figured out a way to break through the time barrier and get to the future, the end of time. And one of the things that they do spell out here, which is something that I questioned last episode, was that, all of this time travel has been fake. All of this has been at the manipulation of the time trapper, and nobody has ever really gone back into, Earth Prime Past or whatever, this continuity is. And so that does answer that. And so that is also part of the reason why I think Brainiac is more angry than the death of Superboy, his friend. But all my brains have been lied to, and that leads to a big fight.
It does, and it's an interesting fight for a couple of reasons. One, Brainiac and his conspirators sneak away from the other Legionnaires and fly into the future in a refrigerator, very much like the one I had in my dormitory in 1989. But more importantly, it is a time cube, the original time cube, or a variation thereof, that Rond created, not Brainiac.
Right.
Rond created this. So the question then becomes, is Rond the only one who ever created a working time machine? And also,
definitely. No, definitely. That is what's happening here. Well, no, Brainiac 5 did create a time machine. It's that the time trapper was manipulating the time stream so that anytime anybody, even Cosmic Boy, when he went back to the 1980s, even when Karate Kid went back to the 1980s, they were all being shutted to the pocket universe. So they were time traveling, just not to the places they thought they were time traveling.
But they thought they were going.
Yeah.
And then you have to, you look at this whole situation. I agree with you. Brainiac is mad, not just because of the death of Superboy, but because of the negation of his greatest achievement. And he says as much to the time trapper. He stands there and laughs in his face and says, I traveled in time. And it's fun to see that. But it's also a little terrifying because that refrigerator is powered by the soul of his old friend Jackson Rugarth, once known as the Infinite Man.
Yeah.
So they've literally channeled this man who's in a coma and the terrible power that he has to go into the future.
Listen, he's brain dead. That means you can do anything you want. Science says if you're brain dead, we can use your body to power AI machines somewhere else in the world. Yeah.
Stop saying AI.
I mean, the Matrix uses people as batteries. It's the same thing, except they're not brain dead. But in this case,
and you understand that the Matrix is fiction. We're talking about the Legion here, pal.
Yeah, also fiction.
This is the Legion.
Hate to break it to you. They're not your real friends. They're not your real.
They are too. They were my friends. I grew up with them. Brainiac and I were friends.
I am surprised that they went to the future without a plan. I mean, they had the concept of a plan, but they didn't go to the future with a plan to defeat the time trapper. They're like, well, I guess you punch hard. You use your mental powers. I'll use my brains. And Lornu, we're going to take you from Duo Damsel down to single lady. And she
Oh, the
doesn't
single
even
lady.
get to put a ring on it.
You know, it is really tragic that another one of Lornu falls in this issue. But it also does remind us of kind of an important rule of death in comics. Death in comics, and I say this with, with my full chest and with feeling, death in comics is always meaningless because it is designed as just a sort of a narrative choice. It's not, oh my God, she's dead forever. Because they found a way to kill a Legionnaire in this case.
Yeah.
That was the same way that they found to kill a Legionnaire back in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a cheat here, it's a cheat there, but it's designed so that you send these Legionnaires into the future. And I honestly feel like the only reason that they pulled in Lornu in the first place was so they could have some sort of actual casualties without flat out killing Mon-El. Although the Trapper does his absolute best to flat out kill Mon-El. And I have never seen a Kryptonian or a Daxamite take a beating quite like this one before.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a 9-panel grid. It works very well. It just shows Mon-El getting hit again and again and again. And so it works great because the first panel, you're seeing it from over the shoulder of the Time Trapper, so to speak, as Mon-El comes in. And then by the time you hit the final panel, the whole thing has been reversed because of the number of times that Mon-El has been punched and beat up and blasted. So it's a really good panel.
Just
the problem
in
with
the face with Infinity.
The problem with Duo Damsel losing another one of her selves is that she now no longer has anything that makes her unique. So even though she's a retired member of the Legion, even though she still teaches at the Academy, she really can't be a Legionnaire anymore.
Well, I mean, it does bring up an important question about what constitutes your superpower. I mean, she hasn't been a Legionnaire since,
that's what I'm saying. She's certainly not going to be one now.
Well, you can give her powers. I mean, it's easy enough to give people powers. It's the year 2988.
We also
saying that nobody in this issue just sort of pops up with powers and is like, "Oh, I secretly have had powers for a long time." ...
Yeah, Ron Vidar shows up, and it turns out that he is he is Earth's Green Lantern. Now they're not saying that the Time Trapper definitely does at the end of time, saying that Oa is gone and the Green Lanterns are gone, but it is pretty much implied in the history of the Legion that we have read is that Green Lanterns are not allowed on Earth because we don't need no space cops telling us what to do. And so the Green Lanterns are just like, yeah, fine, we'll stay away from Earth and we'll go out and continue to patrol the universe. But Ron Vidar has been secretly a Green Lantern of Earth for a long time. And now he is able to unleash his powers on the Time Trapper to no effect.
Yeah. And I've never been clear on when Universo's lost ring, as we saw back in Legion 297. You remember that story?
Oh, sure.
When his ring,
I just remember
his ring,
yesterday. Yeah.
It was the Green Lantern episode.
Yeah.
You were mad about it. You were like, arg, I'm mad about it. Universo lost his
usually
ring.
Mad at some dumb stories.
That's true. I don't know whether...
Give us another 20 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. I'll get mad again.
He will. It's fine. I've been dealing with this for 35 years. It's fine. So here's the thing. Mad, who with the rod. So
I'm not mad at this Green Lantern reveal. I think it's fine. I really don't have a problem with it.
I honestly think it's kind of clever, and it really does feel like less of like a deep cut and more of like a long game, because when they introduced that storyline, Levitz and Giffen introduced that particular story like 4 or 5 years ago in canon before this issue. So not 4 or 5 years ago now in the year 2020, but 4 or 5 years ago then, back in the year 1983. It seemed at the time like it was just a neat little story. Oh, Universo used to be a Green Lantern, but now he's a scuzzball. And that ring ended up on his kid, Little Lord Fauntleroy, which is also how Little Lord Fauntleroy did not die when he was targeted by his father and nearly murdered back before the Universo gambit, like 10 issues ago. Yeah. So it's all really neat. But I will say this, his Green Lantern costume doesn't get a lot of airtime in this issue, but I kind of love it.
No, it's a pretty cool costume. It's pretty basic. And I dig it. I really don't have any complaints about it of any new costumes that have been introduced in this issue or changes to costumes that are being introduced. This is the one that feels the most tame. This is the one that feels a little Kyle Rayner-ish in its aspect. And
I can see that.
Yeah, so I'm fine with it. But again, he doesn't last long. What I do find interesting is that the Time Trapper is quoting Shelley when he's pulling a little Ozymandias, look upon my works in despair, thing, which is kind of ironic because, and that's kind of how this issue plays out, is that maybe they had Percy Shelley, they had that in mind, when they were writing this issue, because the whole point of look upon my works in despair is the irony of the fact that, yes, when Ramses II was in power, he was a powerful king for 60 some years, and he did make great works. But by the time that the traveler who's telling Shelley the story, and from which the poem comes from, it's on a crumbling statue. And that's what we find at the end of time is, yes, the Time Trapper may be all of these things, but in the end, the Time Trapper is no more. The Time Trapper has become Ozymandias, where he is just this crumpled visage buried in the sands of the end of time, which isn't even the end of time, because then Giffen and Paul Levitz start channeling multiple religions, because the Infinite Man comes in, and the Time Trapper is like, I am the end of time. There is nothing beyond me. And then the Infinite Man is like, hold my beer. And it's like, you forget, I am the beginning and the end. I have no end. I can, I've been to the end of time more times than you could even imagine, Time Trapper. I will show you what greatness is by taking you to the beginning of time and the end of time, and I will loop you through this for all eternity. So, they're pulling a little bit on Christianity. They're also pulling a little bit on Buddhism and Taoism about the big circle of life and everything that's going on. And that ultimately is how they end the Time Trapper, because he's trying to prevent, he is a resident of the end of time. He doesn't want to go back to the beginning. Everyone says, don't look at the beginning of time. And he does. And that is the end of the Time Trapper. For now.
It's nice because, metaphysically speaking, that battle.
I think they even have, isn't that, I forgot to look on one of the panels. Is that even a thing of, that's not the Ramses statue that I was thinking of, but they do include a photograph when the Infinite Man is starting to take the Time Trapper through time. I wonder what that photo is of. It's not Ramses II, but it is primitive sculpture for sure. Oh no, there is a Ramses. There is a Egyptian statue in there too. So
right next to his knee.
Yeah.
And it's neat to look at that, not just from, as you said, that metaphysical standpoint of that linear cycle. Time Trapper represents the end and entropy. The Infinite Man represents that endless cycle. But it's also kind of a way of looking at storytelling, that open-ended versus closed-ended kind of questions and stories. And especially when it comes to time travel, we've seen that with things like Doctor Who. This is a closed-ended question. It's a fixed point in time. You can't change it. We have heard for years that the Time Trapper is an inevitable fixed point in time, and yet somehow the Time Trapper, that linear element, and then the Infinite Man as the figure eight kind of crash together and neutralize both of them. So that's actually one of the more entertaining things that I have seen.
Yeah. This definitely feels, so that's why I'm surprised what I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
Why I'm surprised they're not making a bigger deal of this being not only a 50th issue, but this is a major story plot villain moment that comes to an end, right? We feel like we've dealt with Universo. We feel like we have dealt with the Fatal Five. We know that we have dealt with the what's his name? The child of Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl.
Validus.
Yeah, Validus. We feel like we've dealt with these major villains, and this is a major end of a villain. This is like, we don't have to worry about this guy anymore. This is a conclusion to an arc. And as big as that battle was, as interesting as the art is, this issue feels very downplayed.
And it's a double-sized issue, nonetheless. That's the most surprising part of it. Is I did not realize until we sat down. I remember this issue very well from when I was young, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't go, "Oh my God, this is a double-sized, 250 issue." But it is 42 pages, which that goes by very quickly. And I think this is the beginning. You talked about the 9-panel grid. When we get later on into the 5 years later Legion, Giffen really locks himself hard into that 9-panel grid to try and give himself as much, structure
space
as
to tell his story.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm going to write a poem, but I'm going to write a sestina, and it's got that specific, breakdown of what you have to do to make it a sestina. This issue has a few big panels. There's one page where Brainiac has the gall to laugh in the Time Trapper's lack of face. And the whole page is Brainiac being knocked backward and the Time Trapper just bellowing, "You dare."
Yeah.
That's a beautiful moment. And I feel like that's kind of a synthesis of, you have that 9-panel grid. So you have that structure, that discipline of storytelling. But then you also have this moment that when the grid is broken, every time the grid is broken, it's a powerful, big moment. They break the grid when Duo Damsel gets destroyed. They break the grid when Ron steps up and is just like, "Okay, I'm secretly more powerful than all of these schmucks, except maybe Mon-El." And, when he breaks the grid, it really feels like it means something. It's honestly, this whole issue visually kind of makes me aware of how stiff the LaRocque art has been. I feel like the art's been really stiff since Lytle left, and all of a sudden, bam, we have these admittedly weirdly shaped but expressive faces again.
Yeah,
we have these big, broad storytelling, and it's kind of like,
when we get to the faces, I guess the thing that I wish, like, there's some real brilliance in how Giffen is doing the faces. Like, there are times when you look at Brainiac 5 and you can see where the Bwahaha League is about to emerge from.
Yes.
But the problem is, I mean, Brainiac 5 in this issue specifically, give him pink skin and he's Max Lord, right? He's drawn like Max Lord will be drawn. I kind of wish that if Giffen, and he's on for a while going forward, I kind of wish he would have said, "Okay, this is the look for Brainiac 5. This is the look for Ron Vidar. This is the look for Saturn Girl." And he would stick with that. But he tends to, it's like he hasn't found his style guide for each of these characters yet.
Giffen is constantly evolving, because he went from knocking off Jack Kirby to knocking off George Perez to doing his own crazy thing to knocking off, the Jose Munoz. As we go through his career, and we've seen an awful lot of it right here in Legion, as you go through his career, you really do see him kind of constantly evolving and constantly changing. And by the end of this particular run, even 12 issues, I want to say Giffen is the regular penciler for the rest of the run of Legion, because volume 4 goes 63 issues, I think. 62.
It looks like he is still doing the main story, the main Legion of Superheroes, all the way. I mean, he's got some fill-in artists like volume 425 has Dusty Abel doing it, and 26 has him coming back, and so he's doing 24 and 26.
Yeah.
But yeah, he and Al Gordon are basically the art team going forward.
Yeah, for the remainder of this run, so basically going for the next year or so on this book, it's going to be Giffen. And if you compare this issue, the facial structures and layouts, to what we get in 63, it honestly is just, you can look at it and go, the consistency from page to page or panel to panel, you're not necessarily going to say, "Oh, wow, he's picked this face and this person is based on X." But it definitely is something where you'll be able to tell who is who, not just from, hey, they're showing off their powers or they're wearing this color, But you will see things like you mentioned Dream Girl having that round face. That is Dream Girl's thing from now on.
Yeah.
And while it just sort of pops out at us, it is an interesting thing to see. And sadly, Bouncy Boy gets a mustache and keeps it.
Yeah, I like this issue a lot. This was a lot of fun. I really got a kick out of this. I wanted a little bit more hype, but pleased with what I got on by the end of this.
Yeah, very, very good issue. And it does leave us with that big question, that moment of, does Starboy need to come and talk to people? Because I'm pretty sure they just threw Jackson Rugarth to his death.
Well, and so that's part of the thing that is going to come up next time, because we're going to have trial of the Brainiac 5. And so we'll talk about that here.
If you enjoy the show, we would appreciate your support. You can find out more and become a Legion Clubhouse member at patreon.com/major spoilers.
I said, dear listener, that there was going to be a death this episode, and the death is Matthew.
I didn't do it. Okay. So
what the hell, man? Wanderers is, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, Wanderers may be your favorite thing of all time. You may say, oh man, this is so 90s before the 90s even rolled in. This is what comics are going to be. Yeah, you're right. But you know what? This story sucks. I mean, it is the worst story. And I've only read 3 issues of 5 out of this. And this is the worst stuff I've ever read. And I blame you firmly, Matthew. You are hereby banished.
Here's the thing. This is the shocking secret of the Wanderers. Now, the Wanderers are Legion characters dating all the way back to Legion of Superheroes number, 372 back in 1965. And I'm going to be honest with you. When I pulled this, I remembered it being the end of the arc, and I remembered there being Legionnaires in it. So I was like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. We'll get some Legion in there. We'll get the end of this arc. We'll be like, okay, the Wanderers thing is in. And then, this is important, we don't have to read Wanderers again for a while. And
no. We're not reading Wanderers ever again. Sorry. No more Wanderers.
Okay. But here's the thing. The Wanderers is the first Legion spinoff ever to be an ongoing. And I do say ongoing because it was meant to be an ongoing. It went 13 issues because, as Stephen mentioned, it reeks. But Karate Kid's book back in 77.
Better than this. Better than this. Better than this.
This book is kind of an example of what we saw in the 80s. This is that post-Dark Knight syndrome at play. You look at this, they're trying to take these weird Silver Age concepts of a guy with a sword and a guy with wings and 2 pretty girls and a guy who is immortal, sort of, kind of, but you can't say die. And they're putting it in these 80s storytelling tropes. And so you have to give them this whole weird thing where you take cloning. It's a Silver Age thing. Anybody can be cloned, but no, we need this weird, crazy body horror kind of like melded to it, right? And then these new Wanderers have to have a whole bunch of self-loathing and evil. And Dartalon hates himself. And Reanimage is all like, oh, am I the leader that Celebrand was? And Quantum Queen is like, look at me, I'm beautiful and super powerful and everybody loves me, but I'm sure there's something wrong in my life because Jean Grey has that. It really is kind of trying to do the X-Men in the future of the DC universe, which modern DC universe is in no way conducive to X-Men. And yes, I agree with you. This is a bad comic. It is not a good comic. I wholeheartedly apologize. But sometimes I feel like you and we have to read these comics and take one for the team to tell our listeners, our friends, our Legion Club friends who come to the Clubhouse.
I don't think that anybody needs to read
feels
this.
The way I do.
I think that if someone says, oh, hey, the Wanderers is a spinoff, the minute somebody says Wanderers, you can just dismiss anything they have to say after that. If anybody was like, no, the Wanderers is really good, man, you just really need to understand zeitgeist and the angst that was going on in this story. And whatever they say, they're just full of poo. You can just ignore them. I don't care if people want to come at me and say, yo, man, Wanderers is my favorite comic of all time. I don't even care if Doug Moench comes and tries to tell me that this was his beloved attempt at doing Guardians of the Galaxy for DC Comics. And he pleads with me his case on why this is one of his greatest stories ever written. First of all, it's not, because I've read other stuff that he's done. But no. It just from now on, anytime someone says the Wanderers, DC Comics, the Wanderers, not the whatever the Del Shannon song, the Wanderers.
As I walk alone.
You just dismiss everything. Just dismiss. And Doug Moench, I'm sure you are a lovely person, I'm sure, but what were you smoking?
I when I read a comic like this, I like to remember the words of Rod Serling, who is a very, very good writer, and I feel like a kind of a philosopher in my mind, and I think of him as sort of a theoretical forefather, and I like the way he looks at the universe. And Rod said something that I think applies to Wanderers #7. He said that as a writer, sometimes you look back and you realize you've given birth to a turd. And that's true.
Yeah, no. So, okay. So let me be fair here. Let me take the approach, the kinder approach to this. No one ever attempts to make something bad. That is not anyone's intention to create bad art. And you know what? There are probably people who really do dig on the Wanderers, and that's cool because that is the intended audience for this work. And one of the greatest things that any artist can do is hope to find their people, whether that be fans of the Wanderers or fans of the Legion or whatever it may be. And there was, this book would not have even made it 13 issues had the first 2 issues been bad and that people didn't see something in the story that was done. So whenever I say something is bad, keep in mind, it's something that is not for me. And just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not for anybody. And no one sets out to make bad art. And so, when we talk about whatever Dave Hoover and Robert Campanella are doing here, that's that. Take it as is. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can move on. And I can say without a doubt that I will, the next time the Wanderers appear, just move on, because this stuff is not for me. But it might be for you. And if you want to go check it out, certainly go get a sample somewhere. I'm sure you'll be able to find it quite easily.
I don't know that it's ever been collected, but I'm sure that
there are nickel bins somewhere that you can pick this up. Or, maybe penny bins. Maybe five for a nickel. 5 for a nickel.
Here's the thing: if there was going to be a hardcore fan of the Wanderers, you're talking to him. Yeah, okay. Because honestly, I may be the only person who remembers the Wanderers with fondness, and even I'm like, this didn't work. This was not a good comic. All of these creators have done work that I appreciate and like.
Yeah, no, they've all done really great things. And sometimes you have a winner, sometimes you don't. That's where we're going to wrap it up this week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for checking us out. Next week on the show, as I mentioned, the trial of Brainiac 5. And I don't think there's probably going to be a few more people than just Brainiac 5 involved in this trial. Plus, another Legion wedding. What's going to happen? Certainly not tragedy. We're going to have to find out next time on the Legion Clubhouse.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.
This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.